Gotta get up, gotta get up, gotta get up. Oh! And time won't take my love away.
Good afternoon and welcome to LGBTlife, the voice of the Rainbow Republic, and we're delighted to have as our guest today Oein De Bhardúin. We've been looking forward to talking to Oein for a very long time. So Oein, Fáilte and welcome to LGBT Life, and of course East Wall as well.
Thank you very much. Never been here before, but delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's a bright day out there, so obviously the sun is shining on you, Oein. So
it is. I can even see it from the skylight.
Yeah. One of the great things, Oein, about social media is that we get to know people we've never met. And whenever I put up anything of yourself, and I have been doing it now for the best part of 2 years, people are saying, you would be astonished how well known you are, and you might even be humbled by how well liked you are.
Oh, well, okay. That's quite it, yeah. I wouldn't really consider myself well known. With self, but I think that sometimes when there's a lack of a voice, kind of a single voice can sound quite loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, as I said in the in the blurb that we were promoting you, I said larger than life and twice as handsome. Very difficult to not notice, Oein. And you've even we even have a mutual friend who's a fan down there in Kildare, James Cross. So James, if you're listening, Oein is thinking.
Hey, James.
But Oein, I first encountered Oein De Bhardúin, I think about 2 years ago at one of the LGBT noise marches. Was that the first time you were, as we say, speaking out in public? Because you certainly made an impact.
Oh no, I have actually been involved quite some time. I was even kind of as in Galway a couple of years ago, a member of the mock board. So I kind of think that they're kind of being a part of the LGBT movement, and I suppose human rights movement itself has been going on for quite some time. But that's probably was one of my first and kind of most nerve-wracking of opportunities to share part of my story, as well as kind of give voice and sound to a lot of people who are just overlooked.
Yes. When you started speaking out in public, did people say, travellers, there's no such thing as gay travellers? It was a subject that wasn't, as I say, discussed. I mean, how did people respond when they first met you in that regard?
I think a lot of people spend quite a lot of time as building up their own stereotypes and expectations. So one of the immediate responses is, "Ooh," which is very neutral, but it's very, very curious. Yeah. And for the community itself, I think that people were encouraged to remember there's quite a lot of diversity, and encouraged to remember that we are very multi-aspected in our identities and our belongings. And for the wider community, I think it was a nice reminder as well, is that it's not always our views, even of the LGBT community, are very narrow. And they can be very, very isolatory, and they can exclude people so very easily, and which I felt on a certain level that happened during the referendum as well, but that's a different story. Yeah. But so it's about, I suppose, giving people the opportunity to going. Sometimes how we feel about people, or how we conceive people, or how we interpret them, can actually do a lot of damage, not just to them but to ourselves, because ultimately that's what we're doing. We're limiting our experiences about people and about the potential that we have about coming together.
Yeah. I have to confess here, Oein, you're not the first LGBT traveller I met, and the reason being is that I met a gentleman about 20 years ago at a bondage disco in the pod, and we sat down and we bonded, as I say, and over a discussion about exotic cheroots, and as I say, he was living in Ballymun, and I thought to myself, now there is a man that really has to deal with challenges, and I went away really respecting this man. I mean, from your own perspective, it must have been challenging enough growing up in Ireland, traveller. It wasn't like people were embracing travellers when you were growing up. Perhaps even more so LGBT. Let's talk about the first bit. Growing up traveller in Ireland, what's your memories of that?
If I'm really honest, it's very much about segregation. It's about low expectations. From anything from school to medical care, it is always been very well tinted with a sense of low expectations. It feels like a very kind of deep and wide kind of feeling of experiences, but that's usually what's grounded in, that people actually just start to discount you, not just as your potential, but you as a person.
Yeah, and then you respond to that.
Yeah, and unfortunately for a lot of people, and including myself, like internalized prejudice and actually reinvesting that expectation in myself was a reality.
Yeah. It's fascinating you should say that, Owen, because about 8 years ago when I was working at another radio station, I covered an event, and it was a low-key event. It was giving out certificates to some traveller women who had done essentially very basic health courses and hygiene and food preparation courses. And just talking to them, it was really interesting is that exactly what you said is that they had grown up with the perception that travellers die younger, that travellers are going to have worse health problems and so on and so forth. And it was almost like they were led to believe that that was part of their destiny or DNA. And this course had said, hold on, there's another way. Did you have those sorts of similar experiences?
Oh, by far, and I know a lot of them can be kind of self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yes.
At the same time, it takes quite a lot of energy and time and self-investment to actually start looking at yourself in a different way, especially when the common trend for a very long time was very negative.
Yes.
And very kind of, again, expectations towards having that negative outcome. So it does take effort, and it's an ongoing process, to be honest. It's something that you kind of have to challenge yourself daily going, like there's 3 questions you always ask about travellers. And the first is like, what do you actually know about travellers?
Yes.
Actually, what do you actually know?
Yeah.
And anything about from the history, the traditions, the lore, the policies, everything. The second is kind of going, how do you know this?
Yes.
Is this actually something that's actually based on actual fact or common assumption, or is it your favourite traveller story? Everyone seems to have one. And the third is that were travellers involved in the creation of that information?
Yes.
And that's the weakness, because very often kind of travellers aren't. That it's an external analysis and review and judgment, and it is a judgment in itself, and that can be very, very clinical. But a lot of times, especially when we're considering the situation that we're in, it's very biased. And that filters back into us. And I think that we need to actually ask ourselves those questions when we actually not only engaging with traveller service, but actually by ourselves. Like, if this is my expectation, where the hell did that come from?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that for myself has been a very kind of strong point of personal progress.
Did you, and particularly the people that you grew up around, did you perceive yourselves as being socially isolated in the sense that, yes, there are dreadful things happening here. Did you ever see that being mimicked or mirrored in what I would call the wider society, particularly amongst what I would call the urban working class?
I did. I grew up on the kind of cusp of kind of small town. It was very kind of rural in itself, but I knew within like the people off the local town, there was very distinct areas where certain people lived, and anyone, for say, who wouldn't be ethnically Irish or etc. would be very treated differently. So it's something that I think that we build up these kind of schemas and understandings that going, that's what the world does, and kind of we know that it's very unjust, and we know that it kind of is wrong because it's very clearly wrong, but it's very difficult to break that pattern because it's so ingrained at times. Yeah. And I think that's actually what Ireland's really doing now. It's really starting to challenge its own identity of itself, realising that kind of there's Ireland and there's the actual Ireland.
Yes.
And we're on that transition to the idea of like taking off those wonderful green tinted shamrock glasses and realising that we have always been a diverse and very creative and wild community. And it's now about time we're waking up to that this idea of like United Nation, kind of all this times totally in conflict with our actual history. At one stage there was 5 high kings, wonderful. We had this lovely idea of going, this is what Irish is, and I realised that Irish is exactly what it needs and wants to be. And we need to have a bit of freedom with that.
It's very interesting you should say that, because that was exactly when most of my relations were in Britain, and we used to go there in the 60s because that was where you had a cheap holiday. I could go and stay with your relations. And that was my experience of going to Britain, is that I was automatically seen as second class when I got there. When I went there as an adult, or at least as 18 plus, that was confirmed because they actually treated you that way. They spoke about you that way. The Troubles didn't help. No. So it's perhaps an interesting one, Owen, that maybe this chip on the shoulder or lack of self-esteem was an Irish thing that was then also humped onto the traveller community in spades, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's definitely echoes of kind of ex-colonial kind of understandings and how people were treated, and quite often it's that people who are downtrodden, in order to feel that they can ascend a bit more, start treating others that way. So we create this kind of pseudo fake ladder of identity. So you always feel like, well, I'm not that bad, because I'm above someone.
Yes.
And regardless of, rather than just getting that kind of that fake idea and just throwing a sign going, listen, like, we all start and end the same way.
Yes.
Might as well get on with it. Yeah.
That's very interesting. language, I think, is really important,
Yes.
and I think for such a small group of people, I don't think I've ever heard so many expressions, derogatory ones, to describe one group of people. One of the more polite ones was when I used to go to Britain and do fruit picking and stuff like that in the late '60s. We were out in East Anglia, and you go many places, and you would see the same sign: "No van dwellers welcome." Now, it's a fascinating term, and van dwellers. Now, van dwellers were what they used to say were British travellers.
Yes.
They also had other derogatory names, but you couldn't get away with that now, and we would hope you can't get away with it now.
We can in ways. Sometimes our prejudices can be very subtle. Like even the idea of like one of my favourite one to dislike, if there's a way to call it, is the term settled traveller.
Yes.
Now, unless you're an accommodation agency, there's absolutely no reason why you should be defining someone as a settled traveller.
I know, but it's an oxymoron, really, isn't it? Yes.
And I think it's over-investing on the word traveller as the entirety of an identity. You know, it's that your based, your culture and being is based on being nomadic, rather than, like, I prefer the words like Pavee and Mincare, because they're actually more about kind of your cultural belonging, rather than did you actually move.
Yes.
You know? And that's actually something that's like the term settled traveller is still used in facilities very broadly, and but has never not grated on me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always found it a bit of a contradiction because, I mean, my existence has largely been nomadic, as I've mentioned before we came on. So I always thought, well, yes, if it was just purely about the logistic exercise of going from point A to point B, aren't we all travellers, sort of thing? It's like, don't we all believe in choice? It's just that aren't we all supporting the right to life? It's just that some people don't believe in choice, which is a separate matter. But in that sense of the word, Owen, what would Pavee be your preferred identity in the sense of the word? Because I've always tried to be very careful of saying, well, what is the preferred identity for people?
Kind of the myself.
Yes.
Kind of, I like the, especially with me coming from Galway, I like the term Mincare.
Okay.
But I think that Mincare and Pavee are very, very positive because they're supportive of the community, and the word belongs to the community. It's from our language, and it's very open to our understanding and our creativity and our growth, because it's not investing on practice, it's again investing on identity.
Yes.
And that's actually where people have the ability and the opportunity and, as you said earlier, the choice to define themselves, rather than being constantly reaffirmed. And like, to call someone a traveller and then to have quite sharp policies that quite quickly and constantly are eroding those opportunities, like feeds back into more repression and more sense of actually being diminished.
Yes.
Now, that's not meaning that we should ignore that, because it's a very, very, very serious situation, but it also shows that like the community in itself is much, much wider. Like we have variances in traditions and language and spirituality and even kind of most basic common beliefs, you know?
Yes.
And by constantly referring to a single identity, especially as it's an external one, where people more or less are having this identity very quickly and very strongly imposed upon them, rather than them having the freedom to create it themselves.
Yes, no, the reason why I asked that, and again, I'm not trying to equate the two groups at all, is that when I was in Australia, the traditional or the indigenous people, they hated being called Aboriginals, rightly so. Their preferred term was Koori or Murri, M-U-R-R-I, and they hated the term Aboriginal, just like I suspect a lot of your people would hate the term traveller, because it's such a broad brush identity.
Yeah, and it's very, very external.
Yes.
It's allowing that identity being formed and casted, and then also manipulated by a kind of, I suppose we might interpret it as an agency, that actually doesn't have that much care for you.
Yes.
So rather than kind of going, there is a shift in the recent times actually to come back. Like, it's still very agreeable. It's not like a negative word in itself, but at the same time is that we can do a lot more by being a little bit more free.
Yeah. Something I'd be very interested to hear your view of, particularly from the point of view of being a minority. Going to school here, before you were LGBT and all of that, did you go to a mixed school, or what was the situation, and how were you perceived there? Were you welcomed, or were you did you come away uneasy?
My parents are very educationally focused,
Yes.
and they remain very educationally focused. So the idea is that the only way that the world changes and you change the world is that you actually have the tools to do it.
Yes.
And how we saw the tools was education. But the education system locally would be very warm, but the expectations and I suppose the underlining subtleties was that you weren't going anywhere. Like coming up to my leaving cert, I never received a career guidance.
Yeah.
You know, while everyone else would have received career guidance, because the idea is going, this is what the established pattern is. And the reason that pattern is there is because people don't receive career guidance.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, I went beyond that, but suddenly when we started limiting the options for people and started making the choices on their behalf, we actually start predestining their outcomes. Because, again, not that many avenues, people usually end up going in the same direction.
So, when you were coming out of school, then, I mean, what was your expectations? You know, I found it fascinating because I grew up in a north inner city, working class area, and our expectations were very low in that sense. That when we had, you know, we had things we might like to do. We'd like to be the movie directors, and we'd like to be the rock stars and all of that. But deep down, we knew we weren't. That was going to be the guys on the south side, and they were going to be the judges. Was that what? Did you come out with roles you would particularly like to be?
No, my parents were wonderfully liberal, and my mother would be a very staunch feminist. They did kind of going like anybody can do whatever they want as long as they go and do it. And I think that's something that they re-infused in us all through our lives. So by the time that kind of the leaves sort came and went, if it was not for the deep and ever constant impact from the parents, I would have gone into the expected labour trades. Do you know? And I don't think there's anything negative about that.
No.
But that was the pathway, and I suppose the opportunity for people to gain employment and to gain incomes. And thankfully, kind of when it came to my family and the kind of especially my parents, the idea was going, no, we want you to have the options of doing more.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't like to do better or to do different. It's just you have the option.
Yes.
You know, and that's actually what it's all about. It's not about choosing a different career or the other because of potential of finances or security. It was creating going, you actually have options. And that's actually where the power is. And that's where, I suppose, our liberties are.
But deep down, they must have known for you to achieve that and to go down that path, it probably meant leaving home. Were they? Was that something that was there in the background or something that was talked about?
Yes, I think that there is also very, very sharp awareness of, I wouldn't say hiding your identity, but being quiet about it, because it creates new boundaries. And when you're actually struggling, you want to go ahead. The less boundaries you have, you know, in life, you know, the more you go, well done. Yeah. And for a very long time, even perhaps to a degree now, that is a point that creates boundaries. Yeah. You know, so my parents would be very, and the entire family would be very focused on traditions and the meaning of traditions and the origins of them, but also know that you're not bound by them. Yeah. And that kind of reflected very well on education and the opportunities it created for me. And but no, I think that they were very fearful as well. Yeah. They were very fearful. Yeah. And I don't know how I quite got here, but I'm quite glad I did. Yeah.
Something that we were very conscious of growing up in these parts of the world is that what we would call identity address, or address identity in that sense of the word, that you knew that you were behind the eight ball if your street address was this one or your school that was that and the other. You've got a very how can I put it? A very refined name in that sense of the word. That it, to a certain degree, it acts to mask origin. And I won't put it any other way. Was that a deliberate strategy, or is this a family name that's upholding a family tradition?
It's associated with kind of with our language. Sure. So we're so it's De Bhardúin, so it's the child of the poet family.
Yes.
And
what's Bhardúin Osperla?
Yeah, well, it would be.
Or is there an equivalent?
Well, it would be Oscuelga, would be Macon Bard.
Okay, yeah. So you'll be
yeah. There's loads of variances within itself. Like even in Irish, we forget there's like regional variances. And if anything, to the external world, it's a distancing point for our expectations of the community. Yeah. But internally, it's understood that is a direct link with our culture.
Yes.
You know, so it has that kind of almost polarity of view that within the community it seems going someone who is, I suppose, has that connection. Yes. And externally it's like going, oh, we don't actually associate there's anything to do with this community. And I love the idea as well of kind of and then when I say love the idea, I love kind of how people can identify it, of having the addresses associated. Like anyone from my area would know exactly what west of the railway gates meant.
Yes.
You know, there's a very distinct line in the local town that's going, almost about 90% of the community lives west of the railway gate. And every so often someone seems to get away, you know, and live it up here. And like we have this pretense that the community is very, very integrated, and there's a lot of aspects of people very co-sharing. But go to any social event and go to any opportunity to gather, there will always be, in my experience, this kind of segregation, and that can be done out of protection, or it can be done out of pure habit, or because that's just how it comes about. But I look forward to people actually to tearing those lines a bit more. Yes. You know, making that, even though there might be jagged edges, they free people to do more what they want to do rather than what they feel they need to do.
Yes. Want to deal with the issue, or at least address the issue of being LGBT. I mean, it's difficult enough at the best of times in most places. What was it like for you growing up? First of all, what was the realisation? How did that hit you? Did you suddenly think, hold on, this isn't the way the stereotype plays it out that I should be responding?
My initial response and I never had like a single realisation, but I know there's a kind of building I suppose feeling of get out of town. Yeah. Which is the trend most people have.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for kind of very strong kind of family connections and reliance and I suppose investment in education, I would have moved much quicker, and I would have. And but I never quite felt, even within the local kind of tribal community or with the LGBT community, that there was ever a space.
Yeah.
You know, because we all on some level are of a minority.
Yeah.
You know, like even yourself, it's always like, but sometimes that the issue comes when that minority becomes repressed or ignored.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's not always an active rejection. It's sometimes the passive, oh, didn't know. You know?
Yeah.
And that kind of silence means like going, your didn't know is actually my life. You know? So it's very hard actually with people to put down those anchors of, I suppose, want to cultivate your own sense of presence.
Yeah. So, what I would presume, if you like, the realisation came first, and then the acknowledgement comes second. I mean, how old were you when there was this perhaps awakening of a realisation that I mightn't be the same as all the other blokes?
I think around 12. It's hard to put my thumb on it, but I think around 12. I do think around 12. I kind of started to realise that something wasn't wrong, but it was different. You know? And my initial reactions were not fearful. They were not rejection. It was very much like, oh, okay, that's different, because that negativity around being LGBT had never been cultivated directly. You know, because the subject was avoided.
Sure.
So I never had a negative reference point for it.
Yeah.
So when it was happening, it was like, oh, well, that's just different. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm very lucky actually never to have that, because I understand a lot of people never had that wonderful opportunity. You know, or the love of kind of a wonderful care. You know, and I think that if I had been in an environment where that was quite negatively enforced, I don't quite know how I would have dealt with two stresses.
Sure.
You know, I don't know. I don't. Yeah.
And how old were you then when you started being open to people and saying, you know, this is who I am, accept me, or...
16, first person told, which is my sister, which is a really strong rock. And then more liberal around 18, 19. Yeah. And then it's just like a whisper once, especially in the community, once someone knows, everybody knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how was that perceived in the traveller community? Because we often stereotypically see the traveller community as quite conservative, and I just wonder what's your perception there. Correct us if we're wrong on that.
Oh, I mean, there are many people, especially I think because they've been through their own struggles of repression, rejection, and etc. That actually go, that's fine. No, I mean, I have bills to pay. That means absolutely nothing to me. Well done.
Yeah.
Back on to your world. Yeah. And but there is still a trend of people that I did feel and still felt, and I suppose still feel that that don't see the similarities and correlations between both struggles.
Yeah. On that point, then, I mean, you're a big man. But you're a gentleman, and as I say, you're probably like myself, that my first instinct wouldn't be to fight. My first instinct would be to possibly talk.
Yes.
And then run.
And bake a cake.
But were you picked on then because of your size and all of that? People, because there's a lot of little thugs out there thinking, oh, there's a big bloke, I'll make my name about, by giving him a slap. Were you picked on in that regard?
No, for a very long time I went through a period which I would... And it's not to minimise the word, but it would be understanding of like social suicide. Yeah. That it was not socialising, it was not connecting with the community of any sort. Yeah. And it was a way of just trying to make yourself as silent and as visible as possible in order to actually just get through the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
An interesting one. Now, there's absolutely no reason why any LGBT women in the traveller community or the Pavee community should identify themselves to me. As I say, I've met a few men. I've never met anybody who's identified themselves as a woman. Is it easy? Is it more difficult to be a woman and LGBT in the traveller community?
Yes. But I think in general it's difficult to be a woman in our society at large. Sure. And then when it comes to the traveller community, especially as some aspects of it reinforce kind of identity roles and gender roles, and then you might consider the common age of marriage and the age of childbirth and the expectations. So it's difficult, and I think it's also very difficult allowing, I suppose, and creating ways for those people to have a voice and to say this is not my choice.
Yeah. the law of averages suggests that there must be at least one trans person. I mean, do you know of anybody?
Yes, I know several.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Is it difficult again for them?
It's
very difficult for trans people anywhere.
Yeah, very, very difficult. And I think for those I know, they're constantly seeking solid reference points within the community and externally to know that they're not the people who fall through the gaps.
Yeah. Well, one of the advices we always give to trans people is that your best friend in this island is Tenny.
Yeah.
They are great. I just want to say, Owen, Tenny are having they're having a gig Friday and Saturday night coming up at the Chocolate Factory. On Friday night, it's for that great suffragette Lydia Foy. She will be getting an award, and we would hope you could come along on Saturday night, because that's got to get it out of my head. It's the art side, it's the music, it's the poetry, it's all those fabulous boys and girls that we know. So if you're around on Saturday
I think
night,
I think about time I cultivated more of the creative spirit.
come up
you know?
there, and as I
Get
say,
out there.
we'll get our red shoes on and dance the night away. Owen, we'll have to come back to this, because you're one of the great speakers. We'll come back and talk some more at another stage. Unfortunately, we've run out of time now. I'm Nick Fitz. We'll be back in a week's time with another edition of LGBT Life. In the meantime, Oein De Bhardúin.
Thank you very much.
Gotta get up, gotta get up, gotta get up. Oh, oh.